Hey, my name is Alex, and this is Bento Radio. Now, before we get started, I want to get some stuff out of the way first. I'm going to do something a little tricky and fun here to highlight one of those things I want to get out of the way. But first, if you like the show, be sure to subscribe to it wherever you're seeing it or listening to it. If you're seeing it, that is on YouTube. If you're listening to it, that is on your podcast player of choice. And be sure to subscribe because new episodes come out every week, right around 7. Although last week's the audio version was delayed by a day because there was a hiccup in my Acast workflow, I think. But I try to keep everything scheduled on the exact same hour of the exact same day so nobody's missing anything, whether you watch it on YouTube or whether you listen to it in your ear holes. It should always be there at the exact same time, more or less, unless I'm doing something special and weird, hanging out in a hotel room and doing anime con coverage, which I do once a year for Anime NYC. But we'll come to that when we get to that. But on that note, if you really love the show, be sure to go over to the show's site, which is bento-box.ghost.io. That has posts for most of the episodes, as well for a lot of the episodes, as well as articles that I occasionally write about things. If you're looking for an actual day-to-day write-up of Anime NYC when that rolled around in August, I'm sorry, I've just been thinking about it a lot. That will be where it is. I've also done something about anime employment, anime and money. I put some written pieces up there, so you can go check those out. The last thing I want to do is I actually want to show you the thing. So I'm actually going to put a video of the actual app right over here. But I made an app. And my goal of making this app was to make something that was more than just a watch list. Because if you want to keep track of what you're watching every season, there are tons of ways to do that. There are very anime-centric ways to do that. There are very general-purpose ways to do that. Actually, I was using a general-purpose way up until I made the app I made. It's an app called Sequel, which if you're looking for a thing that will take care of absolutely everything you watch for the most part, I would recommend that one. But I've always wanted something that could act like a critical toolbox, where not only could you be tracking what you're watching episode by episode, but be tracking your thoughts on each episode. So I'm hoping to launch it soonish. I wanted to get through one season of me just using it and experiencing it and seeing what works, what doesn't work, what features work well, what features don't work well, what breaks if it's just me using it, because I don't want to let it loose to too many people, although the beta, which is still definitely going on, had last I checked, it was close to 200 people were in the beta and messing with the thing. So if you want to be part of that, you can go over to the website. Once again, that site is bento-box.ghost.io. And you can click the link in the navigation of the site that says Bento Watch App, and you'll see a little blurb, a little stylized graphic with screenshots, and a button that just lets you access the test flight link, because I am only one human and I only have an iPhone, so that's what I developed for. But on that note, definitely go check that out. That site, one last time, is bento-box.ghost.io. If that's a lot for you, I get it. That website is in the description of anywhere you find this podcast. So you can just scroll down to the subscription, make sure to hit subscribe on your way down there if you're doing it on YouTube, and click that link or copy and paste it into a browser, and off you go. Now, on that note, we are going to be talking about something a little bit of a long time coming on the show, actually, and that thing is a little show from this season that will have ended the day this comes out. Actually, as of me recording this, I still haven't seen the last episode, but I'm confident in my thoughts enough to talk about it here now. Also, if you go look at the accompanying blog post on the site, you'll see my notes for all 12 episodes, and that something is called Sentenced to be a Hero. So let me throw it over to to give us a brief plot synopsis, and then I'll come back and we will go through it. Take it away.
Sentenced to be a Hero is a dark fantasy story that completely subverts the traditional idea of what it means to be a hero. In this world, heroism is not a reward, but a punishment reserved for criminals and the condemned. Those sentenced are transformed through magic into heroes and forced to fight on the front lines against monstrous threats. Even death offers no escape, as they are revived again and again, trapped in an endless cycle of battle and suffering. The story follows one such condemned man as he endures repeated deaths, begins to question the system that binds him, and forms uneasy bonds with others who share his fate. As the narrative unfolds, it explores themes of justice, exploitation, and the true cost of survival, presenting a grim and emotionally intense take on the fantasy genre, where being a hero is the cruelest sentence of all.
So, part of the reason why I'm thinking about Anime NYC is because where my relationship with Sentenced to be a Hero, where lots of people's relationship with Sentenced to be a Hero started, was in the screening rooms of Anime NYC. And if you're ever going to a con that's Anime NYC size, and they have screenings, I suggest you figure out what day it has the most screenings, and just spend the whole day in screening rooms. Because this does two things. It lets you see stuff that very often only press or influencers, and I'm not talking about influencers like me, I'm barely an influencer, but only press or high-level influencers get to see. I know for a fact that the guys over at Otaku's Anonymous got screeners, at least one of them did, got screeners for the first, I think, 2 or 3 episodes of this show. But I saw the first episode as its 45-minute premiere in a screening room in Anime NYC last year in 2025. And kind of anybody who saw this thing had it pegged right away. The same thing happened the year before with Yakuza Fiancé, and everybody was right about that show. And just so you have an idea of how these screenings usually go, it's a grab bag every time. The particular screening that Sentenced to be Hero was premiered at Anime NYC and was... Oh, my light just turned off. Why? Otherwise, I'm going to have to read all this, but that'll be fine. The particular screening that was in was stacked for what it was. It was a screening about... It was a screening that featured an episode of Clevatech that was a middle episode that happened sometimes, and the first episode of Hanakimi, which is a long time coming. I want to make sure my mic's still on. Which is a long time coming shoujo reverse harem thing. Sorry about that. But my point is that this was in a screening that had a lot of highly anticipated stuff along with it. And last year, the Yakuza Fiancé premiere was in a screening with MF Ghost and other stuff that people didn't really care about as much. I remember being in that screening and everybody just kind of perked up and, oh, the teenagers are banging and cursing, pay attention. And hilariously, me and everybody who was in that screening who had outlet to talk to you, the viewer, basically said, listen, no competition. One of the coolest and most interesting things we saw at Anime NYC in 2024 was Yakuza Fiancé. That was the same kind of thing for this show. And to get to where I think this show comes from, I want to talk about a particularly odd strain of light novels. Now, I'm not typically a light novel person, and very often the way I encounter light novels are not necessarily reading them, although I have one sitting around here somewhere. I watch the shows that they are oftentimes turned into, because if you don't know by now, light novels have become a key source of source material for anime. And in the way that manga has adopted some anime-isms, light novels have also done the same. If you're wondering, if you have no idea what a light novel is, essentially, it's Japanese pop culture's answer to the young adult fiction kind of novel. And since they have been being adapted for a while, they have the same thing that happens between anime and manga happens between anime and light novels, in that they influence each other really heavily, but light novels fall under the idea of a more participatory form of entertainment. If you have no idea what I mean by that, basically, there are these ideas of passive and active forms of entertainment. Passive forms of entertainment are like this. You don't have to do anything except for turn me on to be entertained or informed in some way by me. That it also applies to anime. Anime doesn't ask anything of you but to keep your mind engaged and your vision focused on the screen. That's all you really need to do. An active form of entertainment, one that we all partake in more readily oftentimes, is video games. Video games can take you along rails, but they always are constantly asking you to participate and control your character unless they need to tutorialize something or unless it's some vital story thing that they want you to see and understand. And even then, very often, if you're doing a walkthrough scene, like a walk and talk scene, you're asked to walk the character and keep pace and all that stuff. And by far the most engaged form of media is reading. And I'm not reading comic books, to be clear. Reading novels, reading books. And what you can do when you have a more engaged form of entertainment is you can be more nuanced, you can take bigger risks, you can do weirder things. And every once in a while in America you'll see a book and it seems like it's really well suited towards being a movie or a TV show. A perfect example of this is the Twilight books. The Twilight books, but also the Hunger Game books. Both the Twilight books and the Hunger Game books, and this is read to a lot of young adult fiction, are both specific enough, but also vague enough that there's a lot of room there. Specifically, the one I think of all the time when I think about this is the Hunger Game books. The Hunger Game books are a great story that's not particularly well written for me. I ended up listening to those books because I was like, I can't read this. I can't make it through this. I can listen to this read and listen to an audiobook of it, but the writing wasn't tight enough for me to be able to make it past the first chapter and a half on my own. And what a book like that, it leaves a lot of openings for interpretation and openings for adaptation and makes it way more possible for things like casting Stanley Tucci as Caesar Flickerman, which he had become synonymous with that kind of character, especially in those movies. Casting Donald Sutherland as President Snow. And all the choices that they made with the movies are very often done in the space that the book leaves open. This gets tricky when it comes to light novels, though. Because while there is that space very often, there's not as much of that space as you think, because light novels are often, they have illustrated pages, they have long-running dialogue and conversation scenes. They are much more structured than something like The Hunger Games is. And what this does is it creates a kind of style guide and template for this is what actually happens in this book. This is what this character looks like, what this character is. And you get confirmation of that because there are illustrated parts of light novels. There are illustrated pages in light novels. It's part of the light novel form. So, two light novel adaptations I want to talk about here are Durara by Riho Narita and Jobless Reincarnation by Rifujin Namaganote. Can you tell I listened to those books and I heard that name 900 times? The reason why I want to bring both of these up is because I think both of them have a link back to Sentence to be a Hero. And Sentence to be a Hero is adapted from light novels. That's why I'm talking about this here. But in the case of Durara, there's something to Rocket Shokai, who's the author of the light novels behind Sentence to be a Hero. There's something to that particular story and the way that story behaves and handles itself to his work, but not necessarily this one, because there's another Rocket Shokai adaptation that's happening this season, and it's running for longer even. It's called Scum of the Brave. And you watch that show, and that show feels like it's spiritually linked to things like Durara, things like Burger Westgate Park. There's a very specific kind of show that slots in with another one I'm thinking of. It's a very Durara-like show where it's all baseball metaphors and the guy wears a mask with a samurai and the great scene where the main character is at a strip club, which is bizarre and hilarious. But I forget that show. If you remember that show, be sure to leave it in the comments. But my point is that show, Scum of the Brave, slots right in with that. This show, Sent to Be a Hero, slots kind of next to, pretty neatly, things like Jobless Reincarnation. And part of that is because of the fantasy world. Another huge part of that is because the fantasy world feels super built out. There's also reincarnation mechanics, the whole thing. But my point is that this story as a light novel does not exist without, and I don't think a lot of Rocket Shokai's work probably exists, without stuff that came before. This show in particular is so strong, is because it's swimming in waters discovered by the medium as a whole and doing really cool, fun things with its story that you don't get to until you have all the right pieces to start thinking through. And what I mean there is, and I should have covered this in the plot synopsis, but the reincarnation mechanic is a really interestingly thought out thing. But it's also, when you stop and think about it, it's the reincarnation mechanic from Log Horizon. In Log Horizon, all the player characters can die, and they come back at the temple, they get revived at the temple, but they lose memories as it goes on. And what you're seeing in Rusty's character in that is you're seeing a character who's almost at the very end of what that looks like, or he's significantly farther down that path than anyone else in the show. And the show gives Rusty this foreboding tinge to him because everyone realizes, Rusty's game for this, but we shouldn't let him die because who knows what memory goes next. Who knows if he'll come out of that temple remembering who I am thing. And that mechanic is alive and well in this show. But what it also does is in using that mechanic and in introducing the idea of the goddesses and the fairy blight and all the world building stuff, by the way, it never stops world building. It never stops giving you more of the world over and over and over again. And a lot of the episodes, especially if you get in the first half of it, are dedicated to, here's this hero prisoner, this indentured fighter. Here's why they became a hero. Here's why that's screwed. And in every single case, every single one of these heroes, I think except for Rhino, who might be a volunteer, who is a volunteer, are just, but their lives are screwed up by essentially, their lives are screwed over and screwed up by encountering the weak points of the system they're in. Take, Leopold, the guy who acts as the commander. He essentially, and spoilers for this entire show, by the way, all 12 episodes, I'm going to assume, he became a penal hero because he was a gossip monger. But completely coincidentally, he got it right. The gossip he was spreading, the gossip that he was just making up on the spot, was correct. He is the dog that caught the car of grifter conspiracy theorists, which is a wild thing. And so you see that in that episode, but you also learn that the magical seals they put on all their necks that keeps them under control and make sure they revive when they die, can also have something else woven into it. So that character, Leopold, there's things he can't actually talk about. He's physically incapable of talking about. But the really interesting thing with that character is that he's shifty as hell. Yes, he was a full-on YouTube alt-right grifter of his time. But he's also exceptional at his assigned task, which is to make sure that the heroes get the resources and equipment they need. And there's a point early in the show where he's just like, hey, look me in the eyes. What do you need? I'll get it for you. And then Xylo, the main character, says something, and he's like, really? So I can get more, but give me a challenge. And it's just like, there's little pieces throughout the show that let you know that character in particular is actually pretty good at what he does. And kind of throughout this show, all the hero characters in particular are, even the one who's a mass murderer, before he becomes a hero, because we'll get to Rhino in a second. There is an internal logic to them. They feel like full characters. They feel like they exist in the world and not above it. They're constantly forced to exist in the world, not above it. Why other characters get to exist above it and away from it. And that brings me to the only person seemingly functioning honestly in this show. And that's the character of Kuvia, who's this general character who we meet in the first episode, who is really earnest and just to a fault. She wants to follow the letter of the law and do what she can to help the world. And increasingly, throughout the show, it becomes clear to her that no one else has signed up for that mission on some level. Like, she looks down initially on Xylo and the other penal heroes because they are supposed to be scum. This is supposed to be a punishment. And then she sees what the people above her have her make them do and how they accomplish it, regardless of the risks, and that doesn't sit right with her. She sees that they try to go above and beyond and do things like save civilians when that wasn't in the mission briefing, and that doesn't sit right with her. Ultimately, by episode 11, which is the time of me recording this, the most recent episode out, although there will be the last episode 12 out on Thursday when this comes out, she finds out that her family member, who's part of the church, because she's the best version of a Nepo baby, if that makes any sense, but she finds out that a family member is probably a bad guy when she thought that he was in it for good reason. And so the show gives her this job of being the person who's constantly getting re-disillusioned by the world around her in a way that she as a character is built to handle and does handle, but it's just really interesting because it gives you this understanding of, oh, there are people who are doing this for the right reasons. There are people who are in it for the right reasons and doing their best and trying to help people, but that is not the majority. The other character who is like this is Terrorita, the main goddess you see in the show. I think you see at least one other one as a side, but she's kind of... You actually see two other ones, because you see Xylo, the goddess that Xylo was contracted with before he became a hero, when he was still in the Holy Knights. But Terrorita she's the id of a just person seeking justice, seeking good, and seeking heroic acts. And the thing that makes that really interesting, and I took a ton of notes on this show, because the show, as you're watching it, just mentions things casually that deserve to be like that. We need to file that away for later. At some point in the show, you find out that there was I think actually in Leopold's backstory, you find out that there was a rumor mill about the goddesses. And it's always goddesses. They're never gods. These are always female characters. There's this rumor mill about goddesses, and there was all this gossip. And later on in the show, actually, I think in episode 10, actually, you see Terrorita interacting completely of her own accord with the unwashed masses, with the background side civilian characters, and they would treat a pop idol. People bring stuff for her to sign. They want to shake her hand. It's very much in the vein of meeting a celebrity. And up until now, the only thing you had to go, up until that point, the only thing you've had to go on, that environment might be there for these ostensibly incredibly powerful beings who show up questionably out of nowhere. There's some stuff behind that too. But up until then, you're like, how is gossip being generated? For a bunch of, you're assuming, because you've only ever seen young girls as goddesses, for a bunch of these preteen to teenage girls who are essentially living weapon systems that bond to one person and travel around murdering the shit out of weird monsters. And in that moment, you start to see a glimpse of what, oh no, they come out of buildings that are mobbed by people who want to shake their hand. Like, being a goddess is half being a weapon and half being a god celebrity. The best way I could probably suggest it is the idols of Macross, who are literally, their voice is the weapon against, I forget the bad guy's name in Macross, the bad guy race in Macross. But like that, it's kind of what if Minmay was, it's kind of just like Minmay. It's like Ronka, it's kind of like Cheryl Nome, like a lot of it. And that brings me to a really important point, because This show is nerdy as hell. This show is otaku-coded as anything you've ever seen. It's got the disaffected anti-hero as the main character who totes around a adorable, over-earnest, freaking underage girl who he carries as his daughter, and she calls him my knight. And I remember when people got a load of this thing and they watched it, this is really cool, but I'm a little worried. I'm a little worried that it's gonna get creepy and gross. And then, I forget what episode it was. It might have been episode 6 or 7. Must have been after episode 6. But there's a scene where Terrorita takes her cloak off, and that made everybody nervous. Just made everybody nervous. And a kind of B-plot that's happening here in the show is, like, Xylo, as a character, is quietly, but kind of unintentionally on his part, just building a harem. We've got 3 girls in the harem. We've got Terrorita, we've got Kuvia, I forget his fiance's name, but he's got a fiance from when he was in the Holy Knights, who insists on being his fiance, even though technically that's not possible. Correct. But that aspect of it, combined with Terrorita as a character and the goddesses as a concept being essentially all, from what you've seen, underage young women, gives just enough of a tinge of this show to feel like real old-school, otaku-focused anime. And if you're wondering what I mean there, the director of the show, I believe, also worked on, in some capacity, I don't know what capacity, he worked on Jobless Reincarnation. And a lot of people's complaints around Jobless Reincarnation involve the kind of story setup and Rudius as a character, because it makes a lot of people uncomfortable. And the point of Rudius as a character is he's not perfect. He is inherently damaged goods, and I've talked about this a bunch before, but goods. And he is inherently damaged goods in a way that was not entirely his fault. If you watch all of what's out of Jobless Reincarnation, especially if you read the light novels, what you come to understand about Rudius is that he is getting a second chance to build a life when his original life, ended with him in the darkest place it could. Like, you get the strong sense that if he wasn't hit by a truck, he would have maybe taken things into his own hands. And that's like an incredibly awful place to be, but it makes sense for him as a character to have weird quirks and weird unforgivable ideas about things. That, does he ever fully act on them? No, but because we are getting the story from his perspective, we get the perspective of somebody who is damaged and is fully figuring out an adult life, knowing that it went bad on him once. And everybody all of the heroes have some quality of that. And in the case of Xylo was betrayed by the church for whom he served as a holy knight. And he tried to offer explanation, but the church refused to hear it. For Dota, his initial sidekick in the first episode, Dota is a thief, no question about it. But when you find out more about why he was sentenced to be a hero, title of the thing, you find out that he was trying to do a good thing. And it was the good thing that got him. We've already been over Leopold. He flew too close to the sun with his gossip, and as a result, he was punished for it. Jace is actually a prince of the country. He was punished for it. Norgal seems insane. Norgal is essentially the show's answer to Alexander Armstrong, but crazy. He seems insane. I don't think we quite know how he did what he did. Rhino volunteered, so that's on him. Not Jace. Another guy whose name I'm forgetting, who was, to be fair, a serial killer. And they caught him and threw him in the pen. And then we have one more hero that we haven't touched on. And this is where they blow the world wide open. And that's Tassia. Because Tassia, like everybody else here, is in a serious, meaningful show about governmental corruption in the face of an overwhelming force kind of thing. But Tassia is like a psychopath from a Mamoru Hosoda movie. animated in a different way. He's almost drawn differently. And the point with Tatsuya is he's been serving as a hero for so long and been reincarnated so many times, and been reformed so many times, that he doesn't know who he is anymore. He basically has the capacity to follow orders. That's all he has. Follow orders, eat, sleep. Those are the things that he has in his head. Nothing else. Everything else is just Play-Doh up there, constantly shifting. And what this does for the story is really interesting because they've told you that if you're sent to be a hero, you are basically shackled to service forever. Not even until the end of time. Not even until you die. Because when you die, you'll be reincarnated if they want you back. And put back on the board. By force, essentially. But when you die, each time you die, you lose memories. You lose a piece of yourself. And I don't know if they're going to get to it by the, as of now, 11th episode, but they might. But up until now, none of the heroes have outright died. So they haven't had to turn that wheel and make you understand what the heck that means and what the heck that is. Certainly Xylo has come close, but nobody has actually died. But in Tatsuya, they get to show you what that means. They get to show you how bad it is once you lose enough of yourself that you can't form full sentences anymore. And it's terrifying. It's a terrifying thing. And here's what I want to talk about: the look and feel and vibe of this show. Because the show does a bunch of things really well. It's animated gorgeously. The world building is really well thought out. But well thought out in a way that's logical, but doesn't give you all the answers. They have basically handheld railgun weapons in this show. But they're just like, this exists, we're not going to explain it, it's just the way people fight here. And they move on with such confidence that you're just like, oh, I guess this is what we're doing. Whatever. That guy throws knives and they explode on impact. Whatever. And all of that together with the fantastic direction and just the really top tier, once again, world building makes for the kind of show that if this was in the era of Gurren Lagann or immediately thereafter, people would look at this thing and be like, that's the kind of show that saves anime. And I think it's better for it that we're out of that cycle, because as much as I like this show, it does have some lopsidedness. They set up a conflict and then they just don't do it. It feels like, between episode 9 and 10. I think my biggest complaint with it is I hope to God it gets a second season, because I think it deserves a second season, if that isn't already announced. But I think it needs more time. And I rarely say things need necessarily more time, because I think that most of the time things need less. But it feels like, at least by episode 11, which is one short of the finale, which is one short of the entire show, it feels more like we're building up to the end of a small arc and not the crescendo of something. It feels like we're, through the eyes of essentially Xylo and Kuvia, each in different capacities, we're getting a fuller picture of what we already guessed was true. And I find that really a lot more. I find it really interesting. The other Rocket Shokai show that's on the season, Scum of the Brave, is actually twice as long. That show is a 24-episode show. This is a 12-episode show. And what I find also really interesting is that this show is going, Scum of the Brave show is very much like this also ran this season kind of show. But the other thing I find really interesting about this is that they basically decided not to have an end credits. And sometimes they don't have an opening credits either. From episode to episode of this show, it feels like they know they need to get their money's worth of the time that they're devoting. So there is an end credits sequence. It's a lot of fun. There is a opening credits sequence. It's a lot of fun. But sometimes it plays the end. Sometimes it plays the beginning. Sometimes it plays in the middle. Sometimes it's not there at all. And this is over 12 episodes. And you get the sense that when they know they need to get a lot done in that episode, is when they just omit the opening credits entirely. When you get and this was another reference to Jobless Reincarnation for me, because Jobless Reincarnation doesn't have an opening sequence currently. What it has is this montage set to an opening song that at some point they reveal the title inside of that montage. And that montage is meant to be the establishing scene for the episode you're about to watch. And it's meant to set all of that up, and then they can just start running instead of having to have screen time for a whole opening sequence. But in the case of Jobless Reincarnation, they always have an ending sequence. And the ending sequences of Jobless Reincarnation are oftentimes phenomenal, actually. But the thing with this show is, because it's 12 episodes instead of 24, it doesn't have time for that. And like I said, that's my biggest gripe with it. Like, it feels pretty breakneck paced. It feels like there is enough time for it to breathe, and there are fun little asides, like any scene with Teruya eating is hilarious because she's adorable. They are putting that stuff in, and maybe expanding it to more than 12 episodes would give you too much, and you would have to put in a ton of that, and it would get to be an overly cutesy thing. But we're also not spending a ton of time with antagonists, and we've got an increasing character roster here. And I would just like a little bit more space for it to have to play with. Even given that I haven't seen the 12th episode yet. But it has that prestige quality. It has that prestige thought process. And and I'm drawing a lot of comparisons to Jobless Reincarnation, because I think this story is as good in its way as that story is. In Jobless Reincarnation, they spend a lot of time thinking about the pure politics of what's going on. And like, part of what Rudy's problem is just like, I really don't want to deal with this. That's why I decided to work for, by the way, spoiler alert for Jobless Reincarnation, if you aren't caught up, on the light novel, if you haven't read the entire light novel series, which I have. Part of the reason Rudy chooses to do stuff is just like, he doesn't want to deal with the politicky stuff of it. He will when he has to, but he doesn't really love to do that. He has basically engineered his life so he can spend the maximum amount of time with his family. By straight up the middle of those books, he's just like, but how can I hang out with my 3 wives and our kids? How can I be the most homebody dad ever to exist? And a thing you feel, and I don't know how it would feel in the light novels for this, but a thing you feel kind of in the middle of the Jobless Reincarnation light novels, I will say, is you feel the wheels spinning a little bit. You feel that this thing has gotten really popular and needs to keep going. And so we get the whole weird aside with Ruquag's Mercenary Guild and all of these other things that come in and out. And then I haven't listened through all of them, but there is a metric shit ton of just weird side stories, these weird short stories they're not overtly connected to the actual story of Jobless Reincarnation. They're just weird little world-building vignettes that they can have. What if Rudy's kids walk home from school or something? This doesn't have that, but I don't think it needs it. I think what I want the time for is just so they have more time to make the gravity of the threat real. If that makes any sense. And that's really my only huge gripe with the show, is just I want more of it. And assuming they get a second season, which I certainly hope they do, we will be getting more of it, because it feels almost certainly like the story isn't ending here. And this was the other thing that felt true about Yakuza Fiancé when it premiered. It's in the block of screenings that it premiered in, which once again was followed by MF Ghost. A lot of people saw Yakuza Fiancé, and they're like, nope, that's where this needs to end. I'm not watching weird initial D fan fiction. We're getting out of here. Or as Miles called it, Miles from Anygamers called it, motherfucking Ghost. But that felt like it had a prestige behind it too. This certainly feels that way, absolutely. And once again, it looks like it. There are stills of this show that are beyond beautiful and do stuff that other shows don't have the budget for. In the case of something like Jobless Reincarnation, Studio Bind was made out of Studio Firm and Studio White Fox exclusively to make Jobless Reincarnation. They have found other weird things to do in between seasons of Jobless Reincarnation, but the reason they exist is to make that show. Studio Kai, which is responsible for this show, isn't like that, but there's so much weight thrown behind this show, and then there's also the Studio Bind connection with the director having worked on Jobless before this. In a different capacity, I think, but regardless, this has that same air to it. Which is why when I saw it, I was kind of surprised to see that in the middle. That seemed like you give it its own thing, and in its own room, and give it its own introduction and the whole thing, not just like thrown into the pile with Hanakimi and the 8th episode of Clevitas, which is seriously what that was. I think there might have been something else too, but I was like, really? We're going to try and surround this with other stuff? That seems bad for all the other stuff that has to surround it. But it's just, all the characters are really interesting. The setting's incredible. The world is really clearly sought out in a way that's meaningful and impactful. The execution of it is best of its class level execution, down to the way they use oftentimes the end credits as framing for the last scenes of the episode. And I get the sense that less people than maybe should be are watching this, because if I haven't spelled it out for you, this is definitely worth your time. If you haven't watched it, go watch the first episode. I think it's like a 45-minute episode or something. We're not talking quite Oshinoko levels of premiere episode, but it is a long premiere episode. And it's also being simuldubbed entirely, which should tell you a lot about what everybody understands about this show. This is a thing people should want to watch. And this is a thing that people should be watching. Because it is anime in the purest sense of the word, if that makes any sense. It feels like something that only this medium can produce for a bunch of different reasons. The action, the emotional tone, and all that stuff. The character archetypes, the incorporation of underage children doing horrible shit. And I think that's probably where I'm going to end it, because I think you should watch this thing. I think it's worth your time. It's available on Crunchyroll fully, by this point, I think fully dubbed, unless Crunchyroll decides to do the thing that it does that I hate every time, which is, for the last episode, we're going to not release the dub for 3 solid months. Who knows why? Just be better at planning. I don't know what to tell you, Crunchyroll. But that's certainly not a knock on this show if that happens. It is still excellent. So definitely go check it out. And that is where I'm going to leave it.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed the podcast. And if you did, be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening or watching. If you're listening to it on a podcast platform and they allow you to give a 5-star review, be sure to do that. If you're watching this on YouTube and you really liked what you saw, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel and like the video. In addition, if you want to make sure that you don't miss a beat, be sure to hit that notification bell so you know when new episodes drop. But if you're wondering, they drop every Thursday night Eastern Time. And on that note, if you really love the podcast and you really love what I'm trying to do here, be sure to give the website a look. That website is bento-box.ghost.io. There will be a link in the description of either this podcast or this video. It'll also be linked in the description of the entire podcast on the information page. It'll also be linked in the description of the YouTube channel. So there's plenty of ways for you to get to that website and check it out. If you want to follow me, my social links are also listed in the footer of that page. So once again, go over there to find that stuff. But I hope you liked the episode. I look forward to talking to you next time. But until next time, I have been Alex. This has been Bento Radio. And I'll talk at you later.